couple things a little different, Adrian. It sounds like you want to maybe take some breaks. So what I'll do is, as I'm going through the presentation, I'll just take a brief pause between each of the slides. And if you happen to have somebody that wants to talk live, we can certainly do that. Otherwise, we'll do what we normally do and take the questions at the end. Okay. So are we ready to get started?
Yes, we are ready to get started.
Excellent. All right. Well, this is just an exciting topic for me. We don't think about MRP and distribution requirements planning as an exciting topic, but the problem is that too many people implement systems for MRP and DRP, and they don't understand how setting the system up wrong can have some very dramatic impacts on the results of the information they get out of those systems. And that can cause just a lot of havoc in organizations. Obviously, you know that, or you wouldn't be attending the presentation today. Our goal is to give you some tips and tricks to set up your current system so that you can avoid late orders, unhappy customers, expedited orders and the fees associated, ways to really reduce your on-hand inventories, carrying costs, etc. Whether you're using your existing MRP or DRP system, or potentially you're looking for a better solution, these will be a lot of tips that will apply really regardless of what you're doing today. Okay? So let's go ahead and dig into the presentation. So let's first talk about supply chain management and as it relates to DRP and MRP. So we have a common understanding of what we're looking at. DRP, distribution requirements planning, is for really a distributor that has more of a complex supply chain. They're sourcing products from different vendors. They maybe have more of a complex distribution center environment where they're stocking in one location and they're fulfilling stocking levels at other DCs or distribution centers. So even in a distribution environment, it can be relatively complex. If you add manufacturing to that, it can get even more complex. So what are we really looking at here? We're looking at all the information that we would need in a system to actually manage an accurate material plan. Okay, so we're looking at our on-hand inventory in all of our inventory settings, right? Safety stock, lead times, etc. We're looking at our manufacturing work orders, what's out there and what do we have planned. We're looking at purchase orders, which is, again, a supply side coming in. In a DC environment, we could have inbound transfer orders coming from a replenishing warehouse. On the demand side, we're looking at sales orders, we're looking at forecasts, we're looking at manufacturing orders as demand. We're also looking at outbound transfer orders to the DCs that would be a demand on that supplying warehouse. Okay, so that's really the data that we're looking at. And then the output of that is, what do I need to do as a planner? I'm going to have planned purchase orders, I'm going to have planned work orders, and I'm going to have planned transfer orders. These are all going to be time phased so that I'm releasing them at the appropriate time so that we get the stock in for the work order or for the transfer. We have the stock with the adequate lead times for manufacturing, all the things that go into that. The other part of supply chain management, which is really critical, is actions, right? We don't need to really manage things if everything's working as expected, but in the real world, there are supply chain issues, right? A machine breaks, takes us longer to complete a work order. A supplier takes longer to ship us a product because they're having supply chain issues. So what we need is the system to give us action messages. We need to know when an order is going to be late or in jeopardy of being late. We need suggestions on moving dates in and out. We need suggestions on canceling orders if demand has dissipated. Okay? And then we need all the inquiries around this process to let us know, what is everything in inventory that is going to affect my supply chain plan, all the item details, the period summaries, all the way down to the individual transactions. So that is really the topic of the day, is supply chain management. And now we're going to go in and look a little bit further at some of the things that people do correctly and incorrectly. As Adrian had mentioned, I've been involved in the industry for a lot longer than I'd like to admit. We've worked with a lot of different companies in a lot of different industries, pharmaceutical, food, beverage, discrete manufacturing, aerospace, defense, automotive, and we've seen it all. We've seen companies that do a really good job. We've seen companies that really need a lot of help. Okay, we'll put it nicely there. So one of the things that we see is inaccurate inventory setting. ERP or accounting system, you have settings in inventory. As you buy an ERP application, you implement it, but you can't implement every go live. Then what happens? Personnel changes, and the people inheriting the system don't know what hasn't been set up. They haven't been trained on the system properly, and you run into this, right? Inventory parameters were not set up properly. Things like min-max order quantities or safety stock levels, right? If I'm not telling my MRP system what my minimum order quantity should be or my maximum order quantities or my safety stock, MRP is going to generate plans potentially for the wrong quantities and also for the wrong dates. Okay? So I would encourage everyone on the call today to go back, look at your inventory system. If you need to document every single field, and then find out which of those fields has an impact either on dates or quantities within your MRP application. Vendor lead times. This is a big one. Everybody leaves them blank, or they're using estimates that are inaccurate. Vendors have different lead times. You may have different vendors for the products that you need. Vendor lead times will change. Some vendors, their lead times will increase. Maybe they start manufacturing their own product, so it takes them longer to make it. Maybe they move locations and it's taking them longer to ship it. Maybe they're sourcing the products from overseas, so they have to build that into their lead times as well. What I always tell people is look at the lead times that you have set up in your inventory or in your ERP system, and you're going to want to analyze those at minimum at least once a year, because you're going to want to look at what was my estimated vendor lead time that MRP is using, or DRP, and what are my actuals, right? I may need to make some adjustments to that. So that's one big area that obviously could cause delays or overstock in some cases, depending on how that's set up. Supplier performance, your vendor lead times range from days to weeks due to their own inefficient planning processes, or they ship the wrong product or the product is poor. So what I always recommend to people is not only do you need to look at the lead times, you need to look at the supplier scorecard, if you will. You need to understand if there's a supplier that has quality issues. Maybe you have to receive that product in, you have to QA it, quarantine it before you actually put it into available on-hand stock. So you really need to look at the suppliers themselves to make sure that you're getting the right product, because MRP and DRP plans are depending on that. Warehouse transfers. This is a lot of accounting systems do not support what we call a three-step warehouse transfer. Okay? If you're in a larger environment where you are stocking product in a distribution center, and then you have smaller DCs that are getting replenished by that main distribution center, you need to set up a lead time, right? It takes time to move that product from one warehouse location to the other. Most accounting systems, again, do not support that. There are other options we're going to evaluate or to kind of talk a little bit about our anytime supply chain solution later at the very end that would support three-step warehouse transfers regardless of the accounting system that you're using. Becomes even more complicated if you're in a manufacturing environment and you're transferring stock from maybe one manufacturing facility to another, or from a manufacturing facility to a distribution center. So I would make sure that if you do have scenarios where stock is moving between your locations, even to third-party warehousing locations, that you're accounting for that lead time. Stocking levels. Your system says you have 100 pieces in stock, but due to shrinkage or poor physical inventory count, you actually have 87. This really isn't just stocking levels, it's inventory accuracy. If you're short, this shortage will cause you to be late on an order. I guarantee and I promise that. So one of the things that you should do is also evaluate how accurate your inventory is. If you're not doing physical inventory counts frequently, you should implement that. A lot of the systems that we integrate with do have very strong physical inventory capabilities. Talk to your partner, talk to your publisher, and understand how you should be implementing physical inventories. In a lot of cases, you don't have to do physical inventory counts for every item, every month or every quarter. But if you have items that have a higher number of hits, meaning they're transacted more frequently, there are more cases where you could have errors, data entry errors, and those are items that you may want to do physical inventories on more frequently. So that's just a little tip for you there. Sales order dates. It absolutely amazes me the companies do not understand which dates in their sales order module impact dates in their MRP or their DRP application. Is it the sales order entry date? Is it the expected ship date, the confirmation date, the promise date? Are there other dates in sales orders that will drive when that demand will actually hit? And then from that, obviously backing up into your requirements for the start of your work order, driving back further into the purchase order date for the raw materials. So go back, look at the documentation, talk to your vendors and your partners, and find out what date in sales order is used in MRP. In a lot of cases, there will be a hierarchy. If maybe it's the requirement date or a promise date. If that's blank, it'll go back to the expected ship date, and if that's blank, it'll go back to the sales order entry date. So there might be a hierarchy there on what MRP or DRP is using for that expected demand date. Okay. Inaccurate bill of material. Oh boy, this is a big one too. A lot of companies set up their system, they're making an item, finished good, they have a bill of material that defines what goes into that. The bill of material changes over time. Maybe they have an assembly that is purchased, but then they start manufacturing that assembly and they never go back and update the bill of material. You should do a bill of material review for every single item that is active at least once a year. Have an engineer look at it and ensure that it is in fact accurate. Maybe you've gotten more efficient. You also want to look at the quantities of each component that are required, as well as your estimated scrap on each step. Maybe you're getting more efficient, you're requiring less scrap. Maybe you've got new machines, new employees, and they're scrapping more. So you need to look at all the settings around your bill of material, definition, requirements, etc., because all of those are going to drive quantity calculations in MRP as well as lead times. All right, so we have the bill of material side, which is really material focused, and then we have the routing operations, right? We have the things in manufacturing that we do to the material to add value to produce a finished good. This is another area where people make mistakes. Is the routing set up properly to calculate the amount of lead time that it takes to make a quantity of pieces, either by hour or hours per piece if it's a larger assembly, or if you're in a process environment, batch sizing. This is very, very common that people don't understand these calculations, they don't set them up, but manufacturing lead times obviously have a huge impact on when the work order should be scheduled, as well as when those materials should be purchased. We're ensuring that you have adequate stock on hand to release those work orders. So I encourage you to go back and review your routings at least, again, once a year for your active routings. If you don't have time to do that, look at maybe your top 10, 20, 30% of your items and at least do a review on them. Move and queue times. In certain manufacturing industries, an item has to either sit to dry, maybe to cool before moving on to the next operation, or maybe it takes a lot more time to move it from one operation to another. Move and queue times are things that can seem relatively small. Maybe it's only an hour of time on the drying or the curing, or maybe it's only 20, 30 minutes on the move from one operation to another. But that will add up, and it does decrease efficiencies. So if your system supports move and queue times between operations, I would encourage you to go and identify what those would be for particular routings of those material and to set them up. Setup and reset up time. In certain industries, give you some examples. Machining, there's a screenshot up here of the machine, right? Maybe stamping. I can produce, let's say, 1,000 parts, but once I run 1,000 parts, the setup on that machine won't be as accurate, right? Or I may need to change out a die and reset that machine. You need to understand and have a system where you can define how long does it take me to set up the machine to begin with, and then after how many pieces do I need to set it up, and when I need to reset it up, what's the amount of time it takes me to do a reset up. Again, all of this is going to factor in the lead times for your manufacturing. Internal lead times. We find this quite often. We receive a product, it comes into our receiving dock, but how long does it take us to get it off the truck and into inventory where it is available to the system, either to fulfill an order or to use in manufacturing? In some cases, you can receive it into a kind of a QA area. You may then have constraints on quality assurance inspectors. They need to inspect that material before you accept it and make it available in production or for fulfillment into orders. So you need to look at that lead time. You may need to repack it. You may need to do all kinds of different things to that inventory before it's physically available, for a sales order pick or for manufacturing. So I would encourage you to look at your internal lead times and define those, build those into the process. Planning dates and calendars. Does your planning calendar take into account holidays, planned and unplanned preventative maintenance, and other constraints on your resources? Most MRP systems are infinite in the capacity. They're going to look at the requirement dates, they're going to look at your manufacturing and vendor lead times, your on-hand inventory quantities, and they're going to plan back using 24/7 availability to determine the dates for your planned work orders, your planned purchase orders. None of this takes into account capacity or availability. If you have holidays and you're not working, if you don't work on a weekend, you need to be able to set that information up so that your MRP or your DRP plan knows that you're not operating in a 24/7 environment. Preventative maintenance if you're manufacturing. I plan to do maintenance for a day on a particular machine or work center. I can't physically do anything on that machine during that day, so I need to really back that out of the lead time calculations. You may have other constraints. It could be tooling, jigs, dies, molds. It could be labor constraints. Maybe you're operating on a skeleton shift on third shift. So all of the constraints and the calendars you need to take a look at as well. Period size, how are you planning? Are you using your inventory calendar, which is probably, based on my experience, set up by month? Or are you planning daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly? And we have customers that have various planning period sizes. They may plan for certain items weekly. That's pretty much the typical norm. So I'm going to look at all supply and demand in a given week. and then analyze that and create planned work orders and purchase orders and transfer orders within that week. We do have other customers that we're sourcing from overseas, and they want to optimize the material plan. So they may be looking for a select group of items over maybe a 6-month period of time so they can optimize the purchase, the loading of the cartons overseas, taking into account all the lead times to get that from customs and physically into their facilities. The last piece is, given the nature of your industry, we worked with some companies that were in commodity industries. To give you an example, we had some tea and coffee companies where their raw materials were very seasonal, and there was a limited global supply of certain ingredients that they needed for their products. So they actually would purchase annually for everything that they thought they might need, because if they didn't, one of two things was going to happen. The global supply of that product would run out, or being a commodity market, as demand increased for that item, obviously the cost would go up significantly. So they needed a very good way to forecast the demand out over the next year, and then to optimize a one-time purchase to be able to get that product as cheap as possible and in bulk. Okay? Inaccurate demand forecasts. Depending on your industry, forecasting can be easy. Forecasting can be very difficult. If I'm selling a consumer-based product and previous history is indicative of future demand, I could probably use a system like a Forecast Pro or Demand Smoothie or something else to statistically analyze my previous demand for those items and to calculate using statistical, easy to say, algorithms to predict my future demand for those items in my various warehouses. That's really not going to work for 90% of the companies on this call today. They don't have enough history. The history isn't accurate. They're adding new customers. Product lines are ramping up. Other product lines are ramping down. What they really need is a better way to manage their forecast. You may want to use some of that history, make it available, but you also need a very easy way to forecast at the item level. Maybe you want to forecast at the customer level. I'll give you an example of this. If I've got Walmart or any of the big box retailers as customers, I probably have a contract with them. I probably know the demand that they're going to put on me in a given point in time. I probably want to manage just the forecast for Walmart or my big box customers. I can then, set up some sort of a forecast that has everybody else that's out there that I think might buy something, and I can use all that information to drive my forecast, which will then drive, obviously, my MRP and my DRP planning. Customer confidence. This plays on top of that last scenario. I'll give you some examples of this that we worked with some of our customers. We have one customer that works with a lot of the big box retailers. They sell consumer products in the fashion world. And if they have a contract with, let's say, Dick's Sporting Goods or maybe Walmart or Kohl's or what have you, those are contracts. They know that that demand is coming in. What happens, though, in the real world is, even though I'm planning for, let's say, 10,000 units of a particular item for Kohl's, a bluebird order comes in from a customer out of the blue, and suddenly we have excess demand for that item. The MRP system is going to look at that and say, well, I have a forecast for Kohl's for 10,000 units, but I have actual demand from another customer for 10,000 units. Consume the forecast, and now I'm not planning for that demand that I already had set for Kohl's, because I haven't set a customer confidence on that forecast. I want to make sure that any demand that comes in does not consume the forecast for a customer where I'm 100% positive that I'm going to have to fulfill that order. Okay? So we've got ways within our application to be able to set that, reserve a forecast for a specific customer. MinMax order quantities. This is a big issue with a lot of companies. Either they don't set it up or their system won't allow them to set it up. I'll give you some scenarios here. Let's say that I am stocking in the each, right, because I'm probably manufacturing the each or what have you. Good example, fasteners. I've got a picture of fasteners on the screen here. Right? I might stock them by the each. But I'm not going to buy a bolt. I'm not going to buy a washer. I'm going to probably buy that in bulk. I'm going to buy that by a box. I'm going to buy it by a carton. If it's steel or something else, I might buy it by the pound or the truckload. So what you really need to do is you need the system to be able to support min-max order quantities, right? I'm not going to buy one bolt. It doesn't make any sense. Buy a minimum of a box of bolts or buy in order quantities of 1,000 bolts or 10,000 bolts. So you need the system to be able to support min and max order quantities within your system. Order multiples, I kind of touched on this a little bit. Let's say that I'm a food processor, or this applies in many different industries. What if I need one egg to make bread, right? I'm not going to order one egg. I can't physically order one egg. I have to buy a dozen eggs. If my customer is shipping me product by the case, but again, I'm breaking it down and stocking in the each, I can't buy one each. I need my MRP or my DRP system to say, all right, well, I need one egg, but instead of putting an order in my vendor for one egg, go ahead and put it in for one carton of eggs, or put it in for a full truckload, because that's how they are going to deliver it to me. Scrap, yield, and loss are also considerations when it comes to your material planning. Distributors that are stocking chemicals, food, beverage, those things are prone to evaporation, spoilage, they can be damaged. So there's going to be loss just from stocking them. Manufacturers obviously have scrap that occurs during manufacturing, and you need to establish a percentage or some calculation around the percent of inventory that you expect to lose to scrap, yield, or loss in stock, as well as within your manufacturing process. Because again, all of this is going to determine within MRP how much product you need to buy and how much product you need to make. Safety stock. Most companies set it up once, if they set it up at all, and they don't really understand how this works. The question then becomes, do you have adequate safety stock levels to cover unexpected spikes in demand? You may even want to evaluate ways to increase or decrease safety stock levels at different times of the year. I'll give you some examples of this. If you are selling or making a seasonal product, let's say snow shovels is a good example. Snow shovels, I'm probably wanting to stock a lot of them, late summer, early fall, because my customers will be ordering more of those, and I want to make sure that I don't run out of that stock. But does it make sense to have the same safety stock level in the winter or toward the end of winter when they're getting into spring? They probably already bought their snow shovels. And those of you on the call that have these problems, I'm 100% sure that you're following this. So I would go back and I would analyze my safety stock, make sure it's adequate, but make sure it's also not too high, because if the safety stock is too high, we're going to incur additional carrying costs. There are items that maybe at one time were big sellers for us. We were stocking a lot. We were having safety stock in excess, but those product lines are winding down. We're still maintaining the same safety stock level for those items. And eventually what's going to happen with those items, they're going to be an overstock. They're going to be discontinued. There's better products on the market, and we're going to have to write off that stock and scrap it outright. What if you had 1.44 floppy disks in your warehouse and you had the same stocking levels of 100,000 units? You're not going to be able to sell that product, right? So kind of a tip there, go back and reevaluate safety stock. Excluding locations from your MRP or your DRP plans. I'll give you examples of this. If I have a product that is staged for picking, right, it's being picked for a particular order to a customer, it's as good as out the door. Do I really want to include that in my on-hand availability? Probably not. if I have product that has been received and it is in a QC status. Some systems do not allow you to exclude that quantity of inventory from being available. MRP looks at it and says, I'm assuming that all this product in this particular warehouse or bin is available, and I'm going to use it in my MRP calculations. Truth of the matter is, 20% of that stock or all of it could be bad material, so you really need a way to exclude particular locations from your MRP calculations. Some other scenarios here might be vendor-managed inventories or consigned inventories. We run into this a lot in manufacturing, where a vendor may stock product at your location. You're going to have to physically put it into a warehouse or a vendor bin, but you don't physically own that until you take possession. So you may want to exclude the inventory in that vendor bin or vendor warehouse and then have MRP suggest a transfer or a purchase order to the vendor, at which time you move it from the VMI warehouse or bin into your on-hand available warehouse or bin. Okay? Material resources. Do you physically have enough material on hand to start production? MRP, even if you're capacity constraining your material plan or your distribution plan, is working off a idealistic set of information in your they have shutdowns, they go material back dates. Or your transfer. You need to understand physically released based on what you actually have. I'll give you a scenario of this. This is a company that we had worked with. They sourced these little wiring assemblies from overseas, making very complex machines and pieces of equipment. So they would run their MRP. They would tell them to release the work orders. They would release the work orders to production. They would start production. They'd allocate all this expensive labor, all this expensive material into work in process. They'd get halfway through and all of a sudden realize the wiring assemblies were hung up in customs. They didn't have enough to finish those particular work orders. So now, follow me here for a minute. I've got all this labor, all this material tied up in WIP waiting for a stupid little wiring assembly that's hung up in customs. Meanwhile, I probably could have allocated those labor resources and or those materials that I've already issued to that work order to fulfill and produce other items where maybe I didn't require that assembly. So you need some way to understand how MRP is going to give you the information and then physically what work orders you can or should release to the shop floor. Labor resources, obviously materials, one constraint. Do you have enough labor to make the products in your work order plan? What is the cost for overtime or hiring more resources? A lot of times people look at APS, or Advanced Planning and Scheduling, capacity, planning, solutions, independent of their MRP application, but they really go hand in hand. You really should have APS integrated with your MRP so that you have a constraint-based plan based not only on your materials but also on your labor. More resource constraints, we're looking at tooling, dies, maybe I require specific dies, jigs, molds, other types of tooling, maybe it's machine tools for a particular work order. I need to make sure those are going to be available. I need to schedule around that. Scheduling the availability of those tooling constraints is going to impact the date when I can release that work order, drive back through the bill of material. That will impact the dates when I need to manufacture sub-assemblies all the way back through the bill of material to the raw materials. When do I actually need to order these products? Okay. The topic I think was 23, but I added one more. We also have machine resource constraints. You know, I've got a specific number of machines or work centers within my manufacturing facility. If I don't have a machine available, I can't make it. Same thing as labor, material, and tooling. I need to be able to take those into account when it comes to scheduling and my material planning process. So those are 23 plus 1 bonus reasons why companies often make mistakes, and sometimes critical mistakes, in their planning process. Hopefully you got a little bit out of that, and you can go back and take a look and improve your process. What I'd like to do now is, for anybody that is looking for a better way to manage forecasting, supply chain management, DRP or MRP, we do have an application we developed called Anytime Supply Chain. It is an independent solution that integrates to a lot of the common accounting and ERP applications on the market, from Sage Software, Microsoft, Epicor, QuickBooks, you name it, where we basically are pulling out the information we need from the accounting system of record. We have some additional functionality we're putting around that information, things like planners, buyers, the multiple order quantities, min-max calculations, etc. And we're then generating planned orders based on that information, which you can then firm up. You can develop forecasts to drive your material planning, and then create orders back in your accounting system for work orders, purchase orders, transfers, etc. Okay? This is just a high-level overview of our Windows 8 application, just one of the screens, so I can find out, by company, maybe by MRP version, what do I have out there? These are my exception messages. What orders do I need to release? What orders do I need to cancel? If I need to move things in, move things out, and when do I need to do all of this stuff? Okay. We also have the full application, and I'm going to give you like a 5-minute overview of this. This is a web-based application. Let's see here. I got to remember my login. So we're going to log into the system if I have the right password. There we go. That's when I get that right. And GoToMeeting slows me up a little bit. What we're going to be logging into here is our material planning dashboard. In the back end, we've set up the data synchronization to pull the information out of our accounting or ERP application. We're then adding a forecast. We do have a forecasting component to the system, so I can add a demand forecast. We then generate an MRP plan. We can't support multiple plans, by warehouses or different product lines or different planners, etc. And what we're going to get is, on the dashboard, is an action summary of things that we need to do to avoid stockouts and late orders, okay, or excess stock. You can see that we are supporting this at a company level. So if in your accounting system you have more than one company, you can run multiple MRPs by that company. You can also run different MRP plans as well. So these are the different messages, and then I can drill in on it. So maybe I want to look at all of the purchase orders that I need to cut or release based on the information in that MRP version. So I can simply click on the link, and that's going to drill me into my planning workbench. Okay. So we're going to load that up here. High level, here we have the different planned purchase orders that the system is recommending to me based on my supply and demand and all the data in Anytime Supply Chain, as well as the information in my accounting system. And when I click on these, all right, so I've got a Cable 400 item. It's a planned purchase order from Rialto. There's my action date. I can then see below here a period summary for that particular order. So I can see by my different planning periods, whether it's daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, annually, whatever, what's a period summary. Maybe I want to look at the transaction detail. So what is this actually telling me? This is my supply and demand over that period. We can also see consumptions of forecasts in here. Which is the vendor on these items. Maybe it gives me the ability to source that product from another vendor. I can also see important information about the item itself. So here's my cable item. Here's all of my inventory information. A lot of this you'll get from your accounting system. Things that we add are things like, maybe this is a make-to-order item, so I want to plan for this and peg the planned work order to the sales order line that it was related to. Maybe instead of creating a new purchase order, I have a blanket purchase order with the vendor, so I want to put in the purchase order number. This is part of the setup on this inventory item. And instead of MRP generating a new purchase order, I would generate a release from a pre-existing blanket. Again, a lot of systems don't have the concept of a planner. They have like a buyer, but maybe your buyers are different than your planners. You can set those up. If your ERP system doesn't support source warehouses for three-step transfers, you can define that in our application. So a lot of things really just related to this inventory record. Okay, and again, right at your fingertips as a planner. The other thing that we're going to want to look at is maybe some action detail. So let me just go ahead and expand this. This is a purchase order. I can firm this up, leave it in my plan. I can go ahead and release this. And then when I generate my orders from MRP, it's going to create the actual order from the planned order, which then is going to drive back into my accounting system of record. And if I want, I can view purchase order information as well. Okay. We do support, obviously indented bills of material, so we're going to drive from the top line, finished goods, down through the bill of material, all the way down to your purchased items. You do take into account all the things we talked about on the presentation today, your vendor lead times, your transfer lead times, your manufacturing lead times, etc. So just a real high-level view of anytime supply chain. I know a lot of you on the call today are using systems like Sage 100. Has an MRP module. What it does very well. What it doesn't do at all. There really is no good way to manage forecasts. This might be a good option for you. I know others on the call are using Epicor. Epicor, absolutely fantastic product. There are some third parties that are available to add some ancillary features. Anytime supply chain might be a better solution than what you can get through those third parties or from Epicor Direct. If you have any interest in the application, just give us a call. I think that'll be one of the questions that we're asking at the end of the presentation. And we'll follow up, do our best to identify what your needs are and if we have a potential solution. So with that, we are going to return back over to PowerPoint, and we are going to wrap up with questions. As I kick it back over to Adrian, I just want to point out my contact information is up on the screen. If you are working with a partner, one of your ERP partners, we do work in tandem with your partner, so they know you and your system better than we do. Our preferred method is that you contact them, they contact us, or you contact us and we contact them. We identify your particular needs, and we schedule presentations, discovery, etc., and work on that going forward. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Adrian, and we'll answer any questions that we might have.
Thank you, Jim. Great presentation. I do have a poll up. If we could just take a moment to answer that poll, that would be great. And Jim, we do have a question from one of the attendees. They were hoping that you could repeat the number 23 mistake.
The third one, huh?
The 23. The last one?
Yep, let me go back there. So number 23 was tooling capacity constraints. And really what the scenario is there, Adrian, is let's say that I'm manufacturing and I'm in a stamping environment. I only have one die that's available, but I might have multiple orders that require that die. what's going to happen from an MRP perspective, if it's not looking at my tooling requirements, it's going to say that I can schedule both of those work orders at the same time, even though I only have one die available, right? It's the same constraint issue I would have if I have only one machine. But unless the MRP system or the scheduling system has visibility into that constraint, you're going to have issues with when those orders are actually suggested for creation.
All right, and I would just encourage the audience, if you do have any questions, go ahead and press that button, that raise your hand feature or that question mark. If you press the raise your hand button, then I'll unmute your line and we can speak live, or just indicate your question manually through the question mark.
I guess while we wait for those to come through, I know, Adrian, you always get asked the question, is this being recorded? And I know you do record them, and you'll be sending out a link to the attendees. The other thing that I will mention here as well is we're not going to contact you and bug you about any time supply chain unless you ask. We will send you some additional information. We do also have a white paper around this topic that does go into maybe a little more detail. So if you do have an interest, contact me or hit our website. It's actually e2banytime.com and find the Anytime Supply Chain product, and you'll see that 23 common MRP mistakes white paper. Fill out the form and we'll get that over to you as well.
And we do have another question, Jim. What is the price point and the specific product that they're asking for the price point is Sage 100 ERP?
That's a great question, and I can't really answer that right now because I'm having a brain fart on that, and I've forgotten. I can tell you that it is very affordable for a Sage 100 customer. Our pricing is based on the number of planning users. In a Sage 100 world, you're looking at probably one, maybe two planners. You may have somebody else doing forecasting. I'd say if you want a ballpark estimate on this, you're probably looking at a starting price around $4,000, maybe $5,000. On average, you might be looking at the $6,000 to $10,000 range, depending on your requirements.
And how long typically does it take to implement this solution?
And that one's even a harder question. So here's the thing with the implementation. Let's assume that you haven't made any of these 24 mistakes, that your bills of material are set up properly, that you have lead time set up. If everything is set up 100% like you would need in an accurate MRP and DRP implementation, the setup and configuration for our application could be a matter of days, along with the training. But what we find most often is that when we go to run MRP, somebody looks at the information and says, this isn't right, and we identify it as a problem in these, this set of information we talked about today. They didn't set up their stocking levels correctly. The bill of material is incorrect. So what we find is that in a typical implementation, because we want to do it right, it's going to take us about a week's worth of time, if not in some cases 2 weeks, to make sure that everything that we need from a data perspective is in fact correct in the accounting or ERP system of record. So if I had to estimate, I would say a week's worth of time on the lower end, up to maybe 2 weeks worth of time. More questions?
Oh,
So there, Adrian?
yes, I am, and I had myself on mute. I love when that happens, and I was talking. I wanted to thank Dan and Kathleen for their questions, and then also thank you, Jim, so much for sharing with us these 23 common mistakes and how to avoid them. And if anybody has any questions, please email me or Jim, and you should have my email. I managed the webinar, adrian@erpvar.com, and we did record this, and as Jim mentioned, we will send this recording to all of you. And with that said, Jim, did you have anything else you'd like to close out with?
No, I just, I'd highly encourage everyone to maybe pick a couple of these items, go back and look at your ERP systems or whatever you're using for DRP and MRP, and you'll see if you can make an impact, without any additional software. If you get frustrated and you need a better solution, contact us. The prices I threw out I think are very reasonable. I think if you're doing effective supply chain management, even with an investment of even double, what I threw out there, $10,000, $20,000, you're going to get a positive return in a very short period of time because you're going to have happier customers, you're going to have maximized resources, labor, tooling, machinery and equipment, you're going to reduce your inventory, and you're going to avoid stockouts. So I think overall a healthier supply chain is obviously going to have a huge impact on your business and your ability to grow that business. So that's really all I would encourage you to do is, if you have any interest whatsoever, give us a call. We're not a hard push on this. We'll find out if we can, if we can have a positive impact on your business.
And one last question, Jim. We do have an additional question. No problems with third-party products?
No, we don't have any issue whatsoever because we're not modifying any source code within the accounting system. We're simply pulling the data out into our tables, like I'm too technical, running that generation and then pushing the orders back into the system. So zero source code modifications to the accounting system of record.
Beautiful. Well, it looks like we don't have any other questions, Jim. Thank you so much again, and I would just ask everybody in the audience, again, if you have any questions, let us know. And thank you so much for taking time out to join us today. And enjoy the rest of your day.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Adrienne, and thank you for everyone that attended.
All right, you too, Jim. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.